Commander Hune had been monitoring deep space signals for over 3 years, but nothing had prepared him for what appeared on his screens that cold Tuesday morning. The quantum communication array lit up like a Christmas tree as an alien transmission broke through the cosmic static. His coffee grew cold as he listened to voices speaking in languages that shouldn't exist. Yet somehow the universal translator was making sense of their desperate words. The message came from something called the Galactic Federation. Hune had always wondered if humans were alone in the universe, but he never imagined first contact would sound like a death scream echoing across the stars. These weren't explorers or diplomats reaching out in friendship. These were survivors. Begging for help from anyone who might be listening, Admiral Kai rushed to the monitoring station when Heian called her. She was a woman who had seen combat in 4 different wars, but her hands trembled as she reviewed the incoming data streams. The information painted a picture of cosmic horror that made Earth's worst nightmares look like children's bedtime stories. An entity called the Void Swarm was consuming entire star systems, and the aliens were powerless to stop it. The tactical data revealed 3 main alien species within the Federation. The Volari were crystalline beings who lived in cities made of living glass that could withstand supernovas. The Nethans existed as sentient gas clouds that could reshape themselves at will and survive in the vacuum of space. The Quill were bioluminescent creatures whose bodies generated enough energy to power small cities. These weren't primitive civilizations. They possessed technology that could manipulate gravity, create matter from energy, travel faster than light. Yet they were losing. Badly. Dr. Nari worked through the night decoding transmission fragments. Her eyes burning from staring at alien mathematics and strategic reports. Each decoded message revealed another disaster. The swarm didn't just destroy things randomly like a natural disaster. It learned from every encounter, adapted to every defense, and grew stronger with each victory. When the Valar used energy, shields, the swarm developed weapons that passed right through them. When the Nethons tried to hide in gas-giant atmospheres, the swarm followed them there and consumed the entire planets. The most terrifying part was how fast it happened. 12 star systems had fallen in just 3 months. Each system housed billions of alien lives, entire civilizations with history spanning millions of years, all snuffed out like candles in a hurricane. The survivors weren't just fleeing to safety. They were running toward the galactic core because there was nowhere else to go, and the swarm was right behind them, getting faster and smarter with each system it devoured. The final decoded message hit Nari like a punch to the stomach. The Federation had exhausted every strategy, every weapon, every hope they had. Their greatest scientific minds couldn't find a solution. Their most advanced military commanders had no answers. They were sending this message to anyone in the universe who might be listening, including civilizations they had never contacted before. The transmission ended with galactic coordinates and 6 words that would change human history forever. Anyone who receives this, please help us. Lieutenant Day spent the next morning running calculations that made his head spin. The Federation's distress signal had traveled across impossible distances, but when he traced its path backward, something didn't make sense. According to the alien coordinates, Earth was located in what their database called Sector 7 Alpha, marked with warning symbols that looked like cosmic skull and crossbones. The more Day dug into the alien files, the more confused he became. Earth wasn't just unlisted as a civilization, it was actively marked as a dead zone, a place where the Federation's exploration ships were specifically told never to go. The warnings were written in multiple alien languages, all saying the same thing: hazardous death world. No intelligent life possible, avoid at all costs. Captain Hannah arrived with a team of linguists and xenobiologists who had been working around the clock to decode the Federation's database entries. What they found was both hilarious and insulting. Earth had a full classification system that read like a cosmic horror movie review. The planet was rated Class 12 hazardous, which apparently was the highest danger rating in the Federation's system. Only 12 planets in the entire galaxy had ever received this classification. Most of them were actively exploding or covered in acid rain. The Federation scientists had compiled a detailed report about Earth after scanning it. From a safe distance, They noted radiation levels from nuclear testing that would kill most alien species within hours. They recorded atmospheric composition that included poisonous gases, like carbon dioxide and oxygen, in concentrations that would be toxic to Valari, crystal beings. The gravitational force was noted as crushing for species adapted to low-gravity worlds, and the magnetic field was deemed chaotically unstable. But the real kicker was their assessment of Earth's life forms. The Federation biologists had cataloged humanity's predator species and concluded that any intelligent life would be impossible on a world where creatures like sharks, tigers, and venomous snakes existed alongside something they called human warfare patterns. They had apparently scanned Earth during World War II and the Black Death pandemic, and decided this was obviously a planet in its final death throes. Sergeant Wu couldn't stop laughing as he read the detailed analysis. The aliens had watched. Humans fighting each other, surviving plagues that killed millions, rebuilding after natural disasters, and somehow concluded that this was evidence of a failed civilization about to go extinct. They saw humanity's wars, famines, and diseases as proof that Earth was uninhabitable rather than evidence that humans were incredibly good at surviving impossible situations. The Federation report concluded that Earth was a biological dead end, where evolution had created creatures too aggressive and adaptable for their own good. They predicted total extinction within a few thousand years and marked the planet as not worth monitoring. The last entry in their database was over 600 years old, right around the time of the Black Death, and they apparently decided Earth was too depressing to keep watching. What the aliens had completely missed was that humans hadn't just survived all those catastrophes. They had learned from them, grown stronger, had built a technological civilization that could now receive distress calls from across the galaxy. The Federation's greatest mistake was assuming that a world full of dangers would kill its inhabitants rather than create the toughest survivors in the universe. General Jin had been expecting this kind of call his entire military career, just not from aliens. When the emergency alert came through at 3 in the morning, he was already dressed and heading to his car before the second ring finished. The underground facility beneath Seoul had been built during the Cold War to survive nuclear attacks. But today it would serve as humanity's first interstellar war room. The elevator descended 12 stories below the city streets, past layers of reinforced concrete and steel that could withstand a direct missile hit. Jin walked through corridors lined with communication equipment that had been hastily rewired to handle alien signal frequencies. The world's best military minds were already gathering in the main conference room, but they weren't waiting for politicians to make decisions. While presidents and prime ministers held emergency sessions and formed committees, the soldiers were ready to act. Dr. Tay had been working for 18 straight hours, surviving on energy drinks and pure determination. She was a quantum physicist who had spent her career studying theoretical faster-than-light communication, never imagining she would need to reverse engineer alien technology to save the galaxy. Her computer screens showed cascading lines of code that looked more like alien poetry than programming language. But somehow she was making sense of it. The breakthrough came when Tay realized the alien communication system wasn't just sending messages. It was creating temporary bridges between distant points in space-time, allowing instantaneous communication across impossible distances. Human quantum physics was primitive compared to Federation technology, but Tay found ways to adapt Earth's equipment to piggyback on their system. She worked like a mechanic hot wiring a Ferrari with parts from a bicycle. But it was working. When the response system finally came online, Tay's hands shook as she typed humanity's first message to an alien civilization. She could have written pages explaining Earth's history, human capabilities, or diplomatic intentions. Instead, she sent 3 words that would echo across the galaxy. Help is coming. Engineer Sun had exactly 72 hours to turn human spacecraft into interstellar warships, and she planned to use every minute. The colony ships sitting in Earth's orbital shipyards had been designed to carry families and supplies to Mars and the outer planets. They were built for comfort and efficiency, not combat. Sun's team worked in shifts around the clock, welding armor plates designed for Earth's harshest environments onto civilian spacecraft. The weapon systems came from Earth's military arsenals, adapted for space combat. Nuclear missiles designed to survive electromagnetic pulses and radiation were mounted. Alongside kinetic weapons that could punch through asteroid-sized targets, the ships weren't pretty when Sun's team finished with them, but they were built like tanks and armed like battleships. The most difficult part wasn't the technology. It was finding people crazy enough to volunteer for a mission that might be a one-way trip to the other side of the galaxy. The recruitment office expected maybe 50 volunteers from elite military units. Instead, they had over 5,000 applications within the first day. Former soldiers, current Marines, test pilots, and even some civilians who had lied about their qualifications all wanted to be part of humanity's first interstellar rescue mission. The final selection came down to 500 of Earth's best, bravest, and most adaptable people. They signed waivers acknowledging they might never see Earth again, said goodbye to families who might never know what happened to them, and boarded ships that had been built in less than 3 days. As the fleet launched toward Federation space, they carried with them humanity's first message to the galaxy. Earth's children were coming to help. Scout leader Bo had seen plenty of destruction during his years in Earth's military, but watching an entire alien city die was something completely different. His ship hung in space at the edge of the Kepler system, hidden behind a debris field, while his sensors recorded everything. The Valari Crystal City had been beautiful, like a massive diamond floating in space with millions of alien lives inside. Its glowing chambers, now it was being torn apart piece by piece. And Bo was the only human witness to an extinction event. The void swarm moved like nothing Bo had ever seen in Earth's oceans or skies. Individual swarm units were about the size of fighter jets, but they flowed together like a living liquid, surrounding the Crystal City from all directions. The aliens had evacuated their civilians first, following emergency protocols that were obviously designed by a peaceful civilization that believed in order and planning. They moved in neat lines, following designated escape routes, making sure everyone got out safely before the military responded. Bo watched the evacuation through his binoculars and felt his stomach drop. The aliens were so concerned with following proper procedures that they were giving the swarm exactly what it wanted. The evacuation ships left in predictable patterns, flying along pre-planned routes that any enemy could track and follow. It was like watching sheep run from wolves while staying in perfectly straight lines. Analyst Young had been studying the swarm's attack patterns for hours, and what she saw reminded her of nature documentaries from Earth. The swarm wasn't just randomly destroying everything in sight. It was hunting with intelligence and strategy, using tactics that looked familiar to anyone who had studied Predator. Behavior on Earth: the individual units would spread out to surround their target, then close in from multiple directions while cutting off escape routes. Young recognized the pattern from her childhood in rural Korea, where she had watched wolf packs hunt deer in the mountains. The swarm units communicated with each other, coordinating their attacks and adapting their strategy based on how the aliens responded. When the Federation ships tried to form defensive walls, the swarm would probe for weak points. When the aliens retreated to fortified positions, the swarm would wait patiently and attack when defenses were down. The most shocking part was how the swarm learned from each encounter. Young watched it adapt to Federation weapons in real time, developing countermeasures. Within minutes of seeing new technology, Earth's military had always assumed that any alien intelligence would be fundamentally different from human thinking. But the swarm was using strategies that human generals would recognize. Immediately, Captain Dong observed the Federation's military response and understood why they were losing so badly. The alien fleets moved in perfect geometric formations that looked beautiful and showed incredible discipline. Their ships maintained exact distances from each other, fired weapons in coordinated volleys, and retreated in orderly fashion when overwhelmed. It was textbook military strategy, the kind taught in academies across civilized worlds. But it was also completely predictable. Dong had spent years fighting against human enemies who cheated, used dirty tricks, and broke every rule of civilized warfare. The Federation's military tactics were designed to fight other honorable civilizations that would follow the same rules. They had never faced an enemy that would pretend to retreat, then attack from behind, or sacrifice some units to position others for surprise assault. The human scouts compiled their findings into a report that would change everything. The Federation wasn't losing because the swarm was unstoppable. They were losing because they had never learned to fight dirty. Their enemy had no rules at all. Commander Gill stood in the Federation's pristine command center, surrounded by alien admirals who looked like they had never seen a real fight in their lives. The crystalline Valari commanders sparkled under the soft lighting, while the gaseous Nethans floated in perfectly controlled atmospheric bubbles. When Gill suggested they observe human combat training, the aliens agreed with the polite curiosity. A scientist studying an interesting specimen, the demonstration took place in a simulation chamber that the Federation used for training their officers. Gill's soldiers entered an environment that would have killed most alien species within minutes. The chamber was filled with radiation levels similar to Earth's nuclear testing sites, toxic gases that burned alien respiratory systems, and gravitational fields that would crush bones adapted to low-gravity worlds. The Federation admirals watched through protective barriers, expecting the humans to request protective equipment, or at least show signs of distress. Instead, Gill's team moved through the hostile environment like they were taking a walk in the park. They communicated through hand signals when the toxic atmosphere made verbal communication difficult, used radiation-hardened equipment that they had developed for Earth's harshest environments, and adapted their tactics in real time as the simulation threw new challenges at them. The aliens watched in stunned silence as humans did things that should have been impossible for any biological life form. Dr. Hai had the even more difficult job of explaining human military philosophy to beings who had never experienced real warfare. She stood before the Valari High Council, trying to translate concepts that didn't exist in their language. The crystalline beings lived for thousands of years and valued each individual life as an irreplaceable treasure. When Hai explained that human military strategy sometimes required accepting casualties to achieve victory, the aliens physically recoiled as if she had suggested eating their own children. The Valari Council leader's crystalline form flickered, with what Hai had learned was extreme distress. Through their translation devices, he asked how humans could possibly function as a civilization if they viewed their own people as expendable resources. Hai tried to explain that humans didn't view lives as expendable, but they understood that sometimes people had to risk everything to protect others. The concept of voluntary sacrifice for the greater good was so foreign to Federation thinking that they couldn't process it as anything other than barbaric insanity. Sergeant Lim had the most interesting assignment of all. He was tasked with creating the first mixed human-alien combat unit, combining human tactics with alien technology. His team included Valari crystal beings who could channel energy through their bodies, Nethans who could phase through solid matter, and Quill who could generate powerful electromagnetic fields. On paper, it should have been an unstoppable force. In reality, the aliens had never learned to fight as a team. They were used to following orders from a central command, moving in predetermined patterns, and avoiding any action that might put them at personal risk. Lim spent days teaching them concepts that human soldiers learned as children: how to cover each other's backs, when to take initiative without waiting for orders, and how to adapt when plans went completely wrong. The breakthrough came during a training exercise when one of Lim's Quill teammates was injured by simulated enemy fire. Without thinking, the Valari crystal soldier threw himself between his wounded friend and the continuing attack, using his own body as a shield while the team regrouped. It was the first time in Federation history that an alien had voluntarily put himself at risk to protect another species. But the moment that changed everything happened during a real combat mission against a swarm scout force. Private Munn was leading a mixed unit through an asteroid field when their Quill teammate took a direct hit from swarm energy weapons. The alien was badly injured and trapped in a section of the asteroid that was flooding with deadly radiation from a damaged reactor. Every Federation protocol said to abandon the wounded soldier and retreat to safety. The radiation levels would kill any rescuer within minutes, and losing 2 lives was worse than losing 1. Munn looked at the readings. calculated that he had maybe 10 minutes before the radiation would cause permanent damage, and ran toward the danger anyway. The alien admirals watching from their command ship saw a human soldier charge into lethal radiation without hesitation, carry a wounded alien twice his size through an environment that should have killed him, and emerge with radiation burns that would have been fatal to any Federation species. When they asked Mun why he had risked certain death for an alien he had known for less than a week, his answer was simple: no one gets left behind. That phrase spread through the Federation fleet faster than any official communication. For the first time in their history, alien soldiers began to understand what humans meant by courage. Major Han walked into the Federation's war room and immediately understood why they were losing. The alien commanders had covered every wall with detailed battle plans that looked like works of art, perfect geometric formations, precisely calculated firing patterns, and retreat routes that followed mathematical models for optimal efficiency. It was the most organized military planning Han had ever seen, and it was completely useless against an enemy that refused to follow the rules. Han had learned warfare in the mountains of Afghanistan and the jungles of Southeast Asia, where survival meant forgetting everything taught in military academies. He gathered the Federation admirals around a simple holographic display and showed them something they had never seen before: chaos as a weapon. Instead of massive fleet engagements with thousands of ships, Han proposed using small groups of 3 to 5 vessels that would strike without warning, cause maximum damage, and disappear before the swarm could respond. The alien commanders were horrified by the concept. Their entire military philosophy was based on honorable combat between organized forces, where both sides knew the rules and fought according to established protocols. Han's guerrilla tactics looked like cheating to beings who had never faced a truly desperate enemy. When he explained that human forces would attack supply lines, retreat when outnumbered, and strike from unexpected directions, the Valari admiral actually shimmered with what Han learned was their equivalent of moral outrage. But desperation makes quick converts. Within a week, Federation ships were launching surprise attacks on swarm formations that had grown comfortable with predictable alien behavior. The results were immediate and devastating. Swarm units that had learned to counter traditional Federation tactics suddenly found themselves under attack from directions they hadn't anticipated. By forces that disappeared as quickly as they appeared, Captain Bin faced an even bigger challenge: teaching aliens how to take calculated risks. The Federation's military culture was built around preserving life at all costs, which meant their reconnaissance missions were conducted from safe distances using long-range sensors. They gathered information slowly and carefully, making sure every scout returned home alive. Fortunately, this also meant they never got close enough to gather the detailed intelligence needed to fight an adaptive enemy. Bin started with the Nethans, who could phase through solid matter and survive in vacuum better than any other Federation species. He explained that getting close to swarm formations would be dangerous, but the intelligence gathered would save thousands of lives in future battles. The concept of risking one life to save many was revolutionary to beings who had never made such calculations before. The first Nethan volunteer was a pilot named Kethnine, who had watched human soldiers risk everything to save alien teammates. Kethnine's reconnaissance mission deep into swarm territory provided detailed information about their communication networks and coordination systems. When he returned with data that led to a major Federation victory, other Nethan pilots began volunteering for similar missions. For the first time in the war, the Federation was gathering intelligence that actually helped them win battles. Lieutenant Ray had perhaps the most important job of all: teaching aliens how to lose battles without losing wars. The Federation's military doctrine treated every retreat as a complete failure, which meant their forces often fought to the death rather than withdrawing to fight another day. Ray had to explain that sometimes the smartest thing a soldier could do was run away and live to fight when the odds were better. The concept of fighting withdrawal is completely foreign to Federation thinking. Ray spent hours demonstrating how human forces could retreat while still inflicting damage on pursuing enemies, using defensive positions to slow down attackers, and regrouping in better terrain for future battles. The aliens watched in amazement. as human soldiers turned retreats into tactical victories by making the enemy pay a heavy price for every advance. The real test came when a Federation fleet found itself outnumbered 3-1 by swarm forces. Instead of fighting to the death or fleeing in panic, they executed a fighting withdrawal that Ray had designed. They retreated in stages, using each defensive position to damage the pursuing swarm before falling back to the next prepared position. By the time the retreat was complete, the swarm had lost nearly half its forces, and the Federation fleet was intact and ready for another battle. For the first time since the war began, the Void Swarm was encountering an enemy that refused to be predictable. The ancient intelligence was struggling to adapt to pure human chaos. General Ryan stared at the tactical display showing the Kepler 442 system, knowing he was looking at either humanity's greatest victory or its most spectacular failure. Intelligence reports suggested that the massive structure at the system center was the Void Swarm's primary coordination hub, a living computer the size of a small moon that controlled swarm operations across dozens of star systems. Destroying it might cripple the entire collective, but getting close enough would require flying through the most heavily defended location in the galaxy. The plan was insane by Federation standards, which made it perfectly suited for human execution. Ryan assembled a fleet of 200 ships, knowing that maybe 20 would survive the assault. The alien admirals begged him to reconsider, suggesting they wait for reinforcements or develop better technology. But human intelligence analysis showed that the swarm was growing stronger every day, and waiting would only make the mission more impossible. Ryan's briefing to his captains was brutally honest. This wasn't a rescue mission or a strategic raid. This was a one-way trip into the most dangerous place in the galaxy, with success measured not by how many humans came home, but by whether the mission accomplished its objective: the Federation. Officers listening to the briefing through translation devices couldn't understand how human commanders could speak so casually about sending their own people to certain death. Colonel J commanded the first wave, 30 heavily armed ships that would punch through the swarm's outer defenses and clear a path for the main assault force. His fleet was composed entirely of volunteers who had signed additional waivers, acknowledging that their survival chances were essentially zero. These weren't desperate soldiers with nothing to lose. They were Earth's best pilots and Marines, who understood that sometimes winning required everything they had to give. The assault began at 0600, our Galactic Standard Time, with Jay's ships accelerating toward the Nexus at maximum velocity, while swarm forces converged from every direction. The alien reinforcement fleets watched from a safe distance as human vessels disappeared into a storm of energy weapons and living metal that tore through armor like tissue paper. Federation sensors recorded human ships continuing to fight even after taking damage that should have destroyed them instantly. Dr. Yoon monitored the battle from the command ship, analyzing swarm responses in real time. She had spent months studying the collective's adaptation patterns, looking for weaknesses in what seemed like perfect intelligence. The breakthrough came when she realized that the swarm's greatest strength was also its fatal flaw. The collective intelligence was so efficient at processing predictable responses that it struggled with truly random variables. Human tactics created chaos that the swarm couldn't model effectively. When Federation ships were damaged, they followed standard protocols for withdrawal and repair. When human ships took damage, their crews made individual decisions based on immediate circumstances rather than predetermined procedures. Some ships retreated, others pressed forward, and a few did completely unexpected things, like ramming swarm formations or using their own weapons against themselves to create diversions. The swarm's adaptation matrix kept trying to predict human behavior and failing because humans weren't following any logical pattern. They were making emotional decisions, taking irrational risks, and sacrificing themselves in ways that didn't fit into any mathematical model. For an intelligence that had conquered half the galaxy by perfectly anticipating enemy responses, fighting humans was like trying to solve equations where the numbers kept changing randomly. Captain Ju commanded the ship that finally reached the Nexus core. His vessel had lost main engines, life support was failing, and his crew was down to 6 people out of an original complement of 40. Any rational commander would have retreated to fight another day. But Ju had volunteered for this mission, knowing it was probably his last. The Nexus structure was beautiful and terrifying. A crystalline formation that pulsed with the collective consciousness of billions of swarm units. Ju's sensors detected defensive systems that could have vaporized his ship instantly. But the swarm intelligence was too busy trying to process the chaotic human assault to focus on one damaged vessel. Approaching its core, Ju's final transmission to the fleet was simple. Tell Earth, we got the job done. He manually overrode every safety system on his ship's reactor, creating a fusion explosion that shouldn't have been possible with the available technology. The blast chain reacted through the Nexus structure, causing cascade failures that rippled across 3 star systems as the swarm's coordination network collapsed. For the first time in galactic history, the Void Swarm had been dealt a blow from which it couldn't immediately recover. And the beings who delivered that blow were the supposedly primitive inhabitants of a forgotten death world. Commander Cho stood on the bridge of the flagship watching the largest military formation in galactic history prepare for what everyone knew would be the final battle. Federation core space stretched out before them, the last refuge of billions of alien civilians who had fled from swarm-consumed worlds. Across the galaxy, if they lost here, there would be nowhere left to run, and the peaceful civilizations that had thrived for millions of years would become nothing more than memories floating in space. The combined fleet was a sight that would have been impossible. Just months earlier, human warships flew alongside elegant Valari crystal vessels, while Nethan gas-form fighters phased through formations of converted civilian craft that had been hastily armed for combat. Alien crews who had once followed rigid protocols now adapted their tactics in real time, using human-taught flexibility to respond to changing battlefield conditions. Cho had learned to read alien body language during the long campaign. Could see the determination in his Federation allies that hadn't existed when humans first arrived. The crystalline Valari no longer shimmered with fear when facing impossible odds. The gaseous Nethans had learned to take calculated risks instead of always choosing the safest option. Even the bioluminescent Quill had developed what humans recognized as combat aggression, a trait their species had never displayed in their peaceful history. The Void Swarm's final concentration was massive, but it was also desperate. Without their primary nexus coordinating operations across the galaxy, the individual swarm units were making mistakes that the collective intelligence would never have allowed. They attacked in predictable patterns, failed to adapt quickly to changing tactics, and worst of all, they seemed confused by the coordinated human-alien response they were facing. Dr. Cha watched the battle unfold from the command ship's observation deck, documenting everything for the historical record that she hoped someone would survive to read. The swarm forces that had once seemed unstoppable were now reacting to Federation attacks instead of controlling the flow of battle. Human tactical doctrine had taught the aliens how to exploit enemy weaknesses, and the ancient swarm intelligence was discovering that it had weaknesses it never knew existed. The turning point came when a formation of Valari ships executed a perfectly timed feint that drew swarm forces into a trap, then called in Nethan fighters who phased through the enemy formation while human vessels provided covering fire. It was a maneuver that required 3 different species to coordinate their unique abilities while trusting each other completely. 6 months earlier, such cooperation would have been impossible for beings who had never learned to fight as unified force. The swarm's final collapse happened faster than anyone expected. Without central coordination, individual units began making independent decisions that contradicted each other. Some groups retreated while others advanced, creating gaps in their formation that the combined fleet exploited ruthlessly. When the last swarm unit was destroyed, the silence that followed felt almost unnatural after months of constant warfare. News of the victory spread across the galaxy through quantum communication networks that had been damaged but not destroyed. By the swarm's advance, Dr. Cha monitored the responses as they came in from distant star systems. And what she recorded changed the course of galactic history. A species that had been conquered by other ancient threats began staging uprisings. Inspired by the Federation's impossible victory, If the peaceful aliens could learn to fight back against unstoppable enemies, then maybe other civilizations could do the same. The Void Swarm had been the galaxy's greatest terror. But it wasn't the only ancient threat that had dominated lesser species for millions of years. Across dozens of star systems, enslaved civilizations began remembering what freedom felt like and decided they were willing to fight for it. The galaxy was experiencing its first widespread liberation movement, and it had all started with a distress call answered by beings from a forgotten death world. The Federation that emerged from the war was completely transformed from the peaceful confederation that had sent that desperate plea for help. They established military academies where alien species learned human combat doctrine alongside their own traditional strategies. They created rapid response fleets designed to help other civilizations facing extinction-level threats. Most importantly, they developed a new philosophy that combined their natural compassion with human-taught courage. The monuments they erected in human honor weren't just stone and metal memorials. They were promises carved in multiple alien languages that the galaxy would never again allow peaceful civilizations to face annihilation alone. The inscriptions told the story of how beings from a Class 12 hazardous death world had traveled across impossible distances to help strangers they had never met, not because they expected anything in return, but because someone needed help. Humanity had given the galaxy something more valuable than advanced weapons or military strategy. They had taught an entire galactic civilization that surrender was a choice, not an inevitability, and that sometimes the smallest act of courage could inspire others to be braver than they ever thought possible.